I hope you can hear it in my voice. All right, enough for me blabbering. Let's get on with some Bigfoot stories. Are y'all ready? All right, here we go. This is an email sent to me by Brian last May. And here's what Brian writes. I'm 57 years old, and this happened when I was 16. I lived in the southern part of San Antonio, not far from Elmendorf Lake. A good friend and I, Alan, liked to go camping, and our parents considered that we were old enough to go out by ourselves and spend a couple of days at a time and return home safely. We liked to go out to the lake and do some fishing. We weren't serious fishermen. We just liked to go out there and spend time together hiking, knocking around, and trying to get a tan. I had just gotten my driver's license, and my father had an old truck that we could use. Growing up in those parts, we had heard stories about there being a Sasquatch in the area. We didn't believe the stories because no one ever came forward with any hard evidence, and besides, who had ever heard of a Sasquatch in that part of Texas and that close to a city? Alan and I went to the same school and we lived in the same neighborhood. I no longer live in that part of the county. I'm up in the north side of San Antonio. He and I both went off to college, but after graduating, he got a job out of state and I've lost touch with him. School was out and we picked a weekend in June to go camping with plans to go out there several more times throughout the summer. We headed out to a spot that we were familiar with. Where we were camping was out in the countryside in a wooded area and away from people. It was not a prepared campground. We got there about midday and we set up camp. We then hiked over to the lake, we skipped a few rocks in the water, and then we just hung out. We got back to our campsite as the sun was getting low in the sky. We ate supper out of a can, and we talked for a few more hours. We had a good lantern, and we never built a fire. Not long after getting back to our camp, we heard noises. Nothing terribly loud, but they were puzzling as to what they might be and who or what might be making them. They were in the distance, and they were weird and unfamiliar. Nothing to which we could say, oh, that must be a fill in the blank. These noises lasted for 10 or 15 minutes. The noises didn't spook us, they puzzled us. The best way to describe these sounds would be a poor attempt at some sort of vocalization and a lot of grunting. We thought it might be some other campers, but we didn't hear movement that you would expect from campers. Maybe that's because we were having a good time, joking and cutting up with one another, and we had a radio on while we were in our camping area. Just as we were ready to turn in for the day, we both heard what sounded like a growl. It was a vicious sounding growl. We looked at one another and decided that it wasn't a dog. It seemed awfully close, but we couldn't tell. The weird noises from earlier and now the growl unnerved us, and we stayed awake for quite a time afterwards to see if it would happen again. We thought maybe we heard it again further away, but we weren't sure, and we eventually decided to go on into the tent. The noises and the growl came from a direction where there was a swampy area on that end of the lake. The next morning all was well, and we talked about the growl and the noises, but could not determine what it might possibly be. We spent the rest of the day doing what we came there for, fishing, hiking, exploring, and hanging out. We hadn't caught any fish worth keeping, but we weren't concerned, and we ate out of a can again, and we enjoyed the evening making plans for the rest of the summer, talking about our future plans and listening to the music. We said to one another that we hoped that we didn't hear that growl again, and we didn't. Grateful that there was not anything out of the ordinary, we talked for a while longer while listening to the radio, and then we fell asleep in the tent. It was a 4-person tent, and we had folding cots and sleeping bags, but the night was comfortable and we never used them. We probably hadn't been asleep very long when the world erupted into a scream. It wasn't like a woman's scream. There was much more to it. It was a cross between a scream and a howl. Whatever it was, Alan and I didn't want any part of it. We were sleeping in our clothes and both sat straight up looking at one another, and we both said at the same time, "What was that?" We no sooner said that when it happened again, but it was deeper and closer. This one was longer, and it seemed louder and seemed to penetrate into my body. Alan later said the same thing. There was no way we could judge the distance. As loud as it was, it seemed close, but we just couldn't tell. It seemed everywhere. One thing I was glad about, we were both wearing pull-on boots, which we couldn't get on fast enough. I hollered, "Let's get out of here," and without waiting to see what might happen next and not picking up anything, we ran for the truck, we jumped in, and we sped off. We didn't hear any more screams to our rear. We never saw anything at any time. Everything we experienced was audible. We burst into the house and turned on the lights, and we woke everyone up, my mother and my father and both of my sisters. They were not happy with us at first and thought that it was a mean joke to play on them, but they could hear and see how shaken and terrified we were, and they eventually believed us. Things finally settled down, and we all went to bed. My mother invited Alan to sleep on the couch in the living room, but he wasn't having it. We made a pallet for him in my room beside my bed. The next morning, that was all we talked about. I hated leaving the camping gear out there, and I said that Alan and I would go back and get it. And my father said, "No, never mind all that stuff." That is when I knew that he believed our story. Alan and I were relieved. He and I found other things to do for the rest of the summer, and we never went camping out there again. We also decided that we were not going to talk about it, and that included everyone from both families, and no one did talk about it ever again. Is there a Sasquatch just south of San Antonio? You'll not convince the two of us that there isn't. I enjoy listening to your YouTube channel. It is what has prompted me to come forward with my own story. Take care. Signed, Brian. Brian, once again, great story. These camping stories are real common, and the audible only type evidence is also really common. I mean, it's dark. It's hard to see these things at night. I think they just come in to run you out. I think they just want to run you out. They don't like us there, but they normally don't attack us or kill us or hurt anybody. I think they know they can intimidate us, and I'm pretty sure they know we're going to get up and go. I thought it was a great story, and I really appreciate you sending it in, and I know everyone enjoyed it. Thanks, Brian. Here is an email from Jason, and this is, I love this story, so I'm going to jump right into it. Jason writes, "My parents were divorced when I was very young, and my father moved to Clinton, Oklahoma. My brother and I stayed in Toledo, Ohio with my mother. During the summer of 1985, my father begged my mother to let my brother and I stay with him in Oklahoma. She agreed, but she didn't want us to go alone, so we had two of our cousins tag along for the summer. My father owned a couple of acres just south of Black Kettle National Grasslands, and there was wilderness all around us. We had a large wooded area to explore. At the edge of the woods, closest to my father's house, hung a sign that read, 'Enter at your own risk.' We were kids, so we paid no attention to that sign, and we headed into the woods anyway. It wasn't long, and we had a fort built for a place to retreat to when we wanted to hang out in the woods. During the summer, we spent a lot of time in this wooded area, and we always stayed until dark. It always got silent at that time of day. Not even a cricket would chirp. But when it was good and dark, we would hear screams from way back in those woods. We thought it might be someone's parents calling for their kids from the other side. We never paid attention to it. Just before we would head back home, we would hear these strange grunts every now and then. It was weird at the time. We kept our fort stocked with snacks. We were always hungry, and we were smart enough to plan. The snacks started vanishing. We would stock it one day with food from home, and the next day all of it would be gone. Of course, we blamed each other, and arguments ensued. It wasn't long before we noticed large, bare footprints in the dust and mud, and there was sometimes a dank, musty odor around the fort. I remember one night, and we began to walk home, and we heard coyotes howling in the distance. We were scared, and we picked up the pace to a run. The howling got closer and closer until suddenly a loud yelp stopped us in our tracks. Everything got deathly silent. The coyotes stopped howling, and not a creature made a sound. We started running again. We made it home, and we went straight to bed without a word to my father. The next morning, my dad woke us all up and asked what we had done the night before. The four of us said nothing. We played all day, and then we ran home, and when it got dark, we went to bed. My dad then asked us to explain the 3 dead coyotes stacked in front of his truck. We walked out, and sure enough, 3 adult coyotes laid stacked on top of each other, laid right in front of his bumper. One of the coyotes' head was smashed flat as a pancake, like something had run over it or stepped on it. We all agreed not to go back to the woods ever again. It scared my cousins so bad they ended up leaving to go back to Ohio. My brother and I stayed behind for another month until the end of summer, but we never went back to that fort. The last month dragged on, and lots of weird things were happening. We would find dead animals in our yard as if they were gifts on several occasions, and it scared us. Towards the end of the month, the dead animals stopped showing up in the yard, but on our last full day in Oklahoma, my brother and I were outside one evening at dusk with our dogs, Smokey and Duchess. We were howling like coyotes to get the dogs going. We were just playing with the dogs, and they loved to howl with us. We stopped howling and laughing, and we noticed things were quiet. They were too quiet. Suddenly, more howling broke out all around us. Whatever was making the noise was close, and there were a lot of them. We headed for the door in a sprint, but the door had locked on us, and so we banged and banged, hoping my father would let us in. The dogs had taken off after the howls. They were protecting us and trying to engage whatever this was. It was a crazy scene. Finally, the door opened, and we ran inside. My father was confused, so we explained what was going on. Then we heard heavy knocks on the outside of the house. Something was banging on the exterior walls. So my father loaded his gun and ran outside. He fired off 2 shots in the air, and everything went silent. Dad started calling to the dogs, and neither one of them came. We headed out back further into the brush to find Duchess dead. Smokey was covered in blood and still had a small coyote by the neck in his mouth. It was dead. Dad called a law enforcement friend and explained everything, and the friend said to kill as many coyotes as you can. He said that he would send a cleanup crew out the next day. We all jumped in the truck along with our badly injured German Shepherd and drove around our huge amount of land for hours looking for coyotes. By this time, the sun was coming up, and we headed home with the 3 coyotes that we had killed. As we approached the house, my dad stopped in the road. His eyes were big and his jaw hung open. Laying in the middle of that dirt road were 15 coyotes, or parts of coyotes. They had all been torn in 2. We drove on to the house. Duchess, our dog that had been killed, was gone. We started looking all around the house, and I finally found her body under the tree that we had hung a tire swing in. She laid there peacefully, covered with leaved branches, with only her head exposed. It was almost as if someone had performed a ceremony with her and neatly laid her to rest in peace. The next day, we returned to our mother's home in Ohio. We never spoke about the event with anyone. A year later, my father passed away. My grandfather later sold the property. I have never looked back, and I have had no desire to return to that place. I remember every detail about the experience, but I have never told this story to anyone, not even my wife nor my 3 children. I was 9 years old then. I'm now 42, and I've had plenty of time to think about that summer. I realize now there were Bigfoot in those woods. We had unintentionally fed them with our snacks. We had gifted them and we didn't know it. In return, they were leaving us dead animals as gifts. They even laid my dog Duchess in a peaceful position and covered her. I don't know if they said any words over her, but maybe they did. Listening to the stories that you relate from others gave me the courage to write this down so others could hear it, and I thank you for that. And then he writes, I don't need to be anonymous, and he gives me his full name and all that stuff. But his name is Jason, and he lives in Toledo, Ohio, and he says, I lived in Clinton, Oklahoma during the summer of 1985. Good night, and God bless. Oh, man, I'm so sorry you lost your dog. I know that was a scary event in your life. I don't know what else to say about it other than to say thank you very much for having the courage and taking the time to sit down and write this out for us. It was a wonderful story. I really appreciate it, Jason. Thank you very much. This email is from a man who wants to leave his name out of it, and you're going to find out why in a minute. This is a good one that about half of the audience that hears this story is not going to like, but it's a great story. It's just a good story, and I'm going to share it with you. Here's what he writes. Late 2016 near Bruce, Mississippi. My grandparents own a good bit of land near Bruce, Mississippi. The land used to be a cotton farm, but after inheriting the land, my grandparents decided to invest in timber instead. There are now acres of beautiful pine trees that sprawl their land, and they pay someone to harvest the timber and sell it off every 15 years. The farm backs up to miles of state-owned wilderness, and it is isolated. Several years ago, a good friend of our family, who has now passed away, used to rent the land to hunt on. Don't ever believe the folks that tell you there aren't big cats in Mississippi. I don't know exactly what breed they are, but a family friend killed one on our land, and his widow still has the thing stuffed in his old hunting room. From nose to butt, she is close to 6 feet long, and she weighed every bit of 250 pounds. Due to this potentially present danger and my grandparents' advancing age, I've taken it on myself to check on the property in recent years so that they don't have to. Every 2 or 3 months, I make a drive down from Memphis and I walk the land with my rifle. I take pictures and I make sure that everything seems in order. I've always been told to make sure that I'm out of there by dark, and I've never questioned that, not until this one particular visit. I pulled up on the property around noon. It was early November and the leaves were blazing with the beautiful fall colors. The sun was out that day and it was cool. I pulled my truck up to the farmhouse and I let myself in. I grabbed a bottle of water and took off. No one has lived on the land for decades and the house is mostly used for storage. I made sure I had a couple of more bottles of water in my pack. I made sure my magazine was loaded, and I slung the rifle over my shoulder. And with that, I was out of the back door and on my way. Walking this property is not a short or easy task. There are hills, old creek beds, and the area the property covers is massive. Typically, walking around the entire property to my satisfaction takes me about 6 hours. I'm a big man, and I don't usually move too fast unless I'm scared. I made my way through the tree line and I got started checking on all the timber. It's an easy enough job. I have an uncle out there who is a mean old drunk, and I was mostly there to make sure that he hadn't screwed with anything. You may be under the impression that this is a well-maintained area, but it's not. There are several other types of trees, bushes, and underbrush that litter the area where the pines grow. None of that is my concern, though. I just go to make sure the old drunk hasn't vandalized, defaced, or cut down anything, and to get out of the city for a few hours. I had been walking, taking pictures, and just humming to myself for probably 4 hours. It's easy to get lost in the serenity of all that is out there, so I decided to sit down at the base of a large tree and rest for a while. I was scrolling through the photos that I'd taken and demolishing one of my bottles of water when I heard what I can only describe as a knock off to my right. I can't do this knock any justice, but it sounded like Shaq had just broken a Louisville Slugger on the trunk of a tree. It was so loud that I briefly wondered if it was a gunshot. I waited for about 30 seconds and I heard 2 more loud knocks to my left. Another minute passed and I heard a response of 2 more knocks from my right again. It was weird. At least I thought so. My mind didn't immediately jump to Bigfoot or any other cryptid, though. I thought my drunk uncle had seen the truck out by the farmhouse, and he and a couple of his buddies were out there messing with me. What better would they have to do on a Saturday afternoon in Bruce, Mississippi? I was a little weirded out, but I pushed further towards the back of the property. I was almost finished looking things over and had just enough time to make my way out of the woods before sunset. I decided that I'd keep my eyes peeled for now, and if I saw any unknown vehicles when I left, I would put a call in to the sheriff's office. I finally got back to the back of the property and had satisfied myself that everything was okay. I had about 40 minutes of daylight left, and it would take me 30 to walk straight back to the truck. I was just about to head back when I heard a deafening crack. I can't really describe the noise, but adrenaline immediately started coursing through my veins. I took a deep breath to calm myself and I started to walk towards the noise. I wanted to know what on earth had made that sound. Listening intently, I heard the crack again, but it was quieter this time. From one knee and behind a large oak, I scanned the woods and the hill ahead of me. There was movement way up on the hill. I unslung my rifle to look through the scope. On top of the hill, at the base of a tree, I saw a large black shape. I was relieved a bit and expecting to see a black bear that had obviously made it this far south. It's rare, but they are here. My relief was short-lived as the creature stood up on 2 legs. I watched it rip a long piece of bark from a tree and toss it aside. Even in the evening light, I could see the muscles ripple under its hair as it tore the bark away, and the loud crack invaded my ears once more. You've heard the old expression that it made my blood run cold, right? Well, I'm telling you, it couldn't be more of an accurate sentiment. I felt my body lock up, and my blood did run cold as ice. I could feel adrenaline pumping through me, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I got my composure and decided that I was going to take a shot at it. I didn't know what this thing was, and I didn't want it to hear me leaving and give chase. Truthfully, I was scared, and I didn't act rationally. Had my wits been about me, I likely would have left the creature alone and left as quickly and quietly as possible. It was preoccupied, and I had every opportunity to just walk out of there, but I didn't. I took a deep breath. I slid the bolt on my .30-06 to chamber a round. Almost as if the creature heard the round click into place, it turned and looked in my direction. But I fired before it could turn. I'd been aiming for the upper back, hoping to sever the spinal cord, but I did not hit my mark. The bullet jerked right and pierced the creature's right shoulder instead. I held my position waiting for the creature to fall over dead. I hoped beyond hope that I'd somehow fatally wounded it. The creature turned to face me now, holding its right shoulder, its expression contorted into what I can only assume was a mix of pain and anger, and it let out the loudest roar I have ever heard. The thing had to be at least 7 feet tall and weighed no less than 500 pounds. The thing that stood out was his eyes. They were alive and furious. It was as if I was looking into the eyes of another man. These were eyes that reflected understanding, pain, and emotion. They were almost human. It shook me to the core, and I could feel my chest and ribs vibrate from the roar's base. I chambered another round and fired again, and I missed completely, burying the shot in a tree now behind the creature. I heard another loud roar to my left, off in the distance. Oh my God, there's 2, I muttered to myself, and instinctively jerked my head in the direction that it came from. I'd only looked away for a moment, but as I put my eye to the scope, I realized the first creature was nowhere to be seen. I scanned the area around me and started to hear thudding footfalls as the creature crashed through the brush towards me. I fired another shot in the direction the steps were coming from, and I bolted out of there. This had all taken a bit of time, and it was almost dark now. Every shape in the darkness looked like the creature ready to grab me and tear me apart. I had no flashlight and I couldn't see where I was stepping, but I kept running in the direction of my truck. I could hear heavy footfalls behind me, just over the sound of my own heart pounding. I turned and fired into the darkness again, and I heard the bullet make contact with a tree trunk. Another loud roar came from several yards away in the same direction. At this point, I could feel my body begin to fail. As I stated earlier, I'm a big man and I don't move this fast very often. My muscles burned and it hurt to breathe, and my head was pounding, and I thought my heart was going to leap out of my chest. I pulled the slide back on my rifle one more time as I ran, and I saw that I had one round left. I could see what I thought was my exit about 150 yards ahead of me, but the creature or creatures were gaining on me fast. I pushed the bolt forward with a slam and I spun around, aiming at what I hoped would be the creature in a dark shape barely visible. I took the last shot. The bullet made contact with something, followed by a loud moan and then a heavy thud. My legs gave out and I fell backwards. I started scooting myself backwards with as much strength and balance as my exhausted body would give me. I heard nothing for a moment and then began to hear more heavy footfalls thudding toward my direction. I didn't stick around and launched myself toward the tree line, finally breaking through and catching sight of the farmhouse and my truck. I ran the remaining 300 yards to my truck and I turned to take one last look at the tree line before getting out of there. I fumbled with my keys, trying my best to get the truck door open and get inside to safety. I started to hear more vocalizations. It started with a long, drawn-out moan, almost like an ambulance siren, and was followed by another and then another until there were at least 4 of these things howling in unison, all from just ahead of me inside the tree line. Fumbling to get the truck door open, I hopped in and I threw on my bright lights. I'll never forget what I saw staring back at me. Just at the edge of the trees, obscured by brush and foliage, I counted 7 sets of bright yellow reflective eyes. The shortest one was around 5 feet tall, and the largest sat over 9 feet. I panicked all over again, threw my truck in reverse onto the highway, and sat in silence and shock on my entire ride back to Memphis. That was over 3 years ago, and to this day I've not told a soul. Who would believe me anyway? I've been back several times since, and I haven't seen anything else. I've heard more knocks, and I easily feel as though I'm being watched, but I haven't seen anything else. Oh, that was a great story. It was so exciting, and I have probably no less than 10 questions I would ask that man if I was standing in front of him, but I won't do it here because, I don't really dig in too deep on these stories. I just read them like I get them. And that was a great, exciting story. Be safe what you're shooting at out in the woods. Make sure you're not just shooting at dark shapes and things like that. That's all I would like to say. This Bigfoot thing gets people jittery, especially hunters when they're in the wood. Just keep your wits about you. Make sure you know what you're shooting at, especially if you're looking through a scope. Make sure you can see horns or feathers or whatever you're shooting at, and it's not an upright bipedal creature that may look like a Bigfoot, but it may just be a guy in a coat. Just be safe out there when you take shots at dark figures. I think that's all I would say on that story, other than that I really appreciate the man writing it in. It was a good story, and I really appreciate it. All right, that'll wind up another video. Thank you all so much for listening, especially for listening this far. If you get a chance, what helps my channel is for you to share my videos. If you enjoy them, if you think they're worthy of being shared on your Facebook page, I don't know if you can share them on Instagram, Twitter. I have a Twitter account. I never even look at it. I rarely look at Instagram. I'm just not good at social media. But I see stuff shared all the time, and if you'd like to help the channel, don't send money. You don't have to buy a t-shirt. Just share my videos. That's a great way to do that. All right, thank you all again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.